The old brick courthouse stood in the center of town like a relic from another era. Tall arched windows, weathered stone steps, and a flag rippling in the cool morning breeze. Inside, the air buzzed with an electricity that had nothing to do with the ceiling fans humming overhead. It was the day of the Rex trial, the day a police dog's life would be decided not by a vet, not by his handler, but by a judge's gavel. Every bench in the gallery was full. Reporters from local stations sat shoulder to shoulder with national correspondents, their camera crews wedged in the back corners like silent vultures waiting for the moment to swoop. The townspeople had arrived early, many carrying "Justice for Rex" signs they weren't allowed to bring past the metal detectors. Conversations were kept low, but you could hear the same questions echo in different voices. Will they put him down? What really happened that day? Near the front of the courtroom sat Rex himself, a large German shepherd with a coat of deep black and tan, his presence as commanding as any uniformed officer. His handler, Officer Mark Hensley, sat stiff beside him, his eyes darting between the defense attorney and the entrance to the courtroom. Rex wasn't in uniform today. No vest, no badge. Just a thick leather collar and a leash that hung slack between him and his partner. Despite the noise and the strangers, Rex sat in perfect posture, ears alert, eyes steady. But every so often, his gaze would flick toward the door. The prosecution's table was stacked with folders, photographs, and a laptop open to paused. Footage from body cams, footage that had already been played in local news reports. The images were grainy, chaotic, and according to the prosecution, damning. To them, Rex wasn't a hero. He was an animal that had overstepped his training and mauled a suspect who wasn't posing a threat. They would argue that such unpredictability had no place in law enforcement. They would argue that Rex was dangerous. The defense, on the other hand, claimed the footage told only part of the story. Their version painted Rex as a protector, one who acted not out of aggression, but out of loyalty and instinct. An instinct that had saved a life. And today, that claim would hinge on a witness no one expected, a 3-year-old girl. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open, and a hush fell instantly. A woman stepped in, clutching the hand of a child barely tall enough to see over the benches. The girl's hair was tied in 2 neat braids, and in her free arm she carried a small, worn stuffed bear with 1 ear missing. Her mother's grip was protective, almost nervous, as if she knew the weight of the moment they were walking into. All eyes turned toward them. Even the judge, a man who had spent decades behind the bench and claimed nothing surprised him anymore, leaned forward slightly. The little girl, Emily, was the youngest witness anyone could remember taking the stand in this courthouse. Some whispered that bringing her in was a desperate move by the defense. Others thought it was brilliant. Rex noticed her immediately. His ears pricked forward, and his head tilted ever so slightly, not the way a guard dog reacts to a stranger, but the way an old friend might look at someone they hadn't seen in a while. It was a small shift, but in the sea of tense expressions, it stood out. Officer Hensley noticed it too, his gaze flicking from the dog to the child and back again. Emily didn't seem afraid of Rex. In fact, she glanced at him with a flicker of recognition before looking down at the bear in her arms. She kept walking with her mother toward the front, their footsteps soft against the polished wooden floor. The sound of their shoes, the creak of the benches as people turned to watch. Every little noise seemed amplified in the silence. Bailiff closed the doors behind them, and the defense attorney, a tall woman named Claire Benton, rose from her seat. She greeted Emily's mother with a nod, then looked toward the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear. "The defense calls Emily Carter to the stand." A murmur passed through the courtroom. Somewhere in the back, a reporter's pen scratched rapidly against paper. The judge raised an eyebrow, but motioned toward the small witness chair. They had prepared for this. A special booster seat had been placed there so Emily could be seen over the rail. Emily's mother led her forward, whispering something. Only she could hear. Emily climbed up onto the chair, the oversized wooden armrests dwarfing her tiny frame. She held her bear tightly, its worn fur pressed against her cheek for comfort. Claire Benton stepped closer, her tone softening as she crouched slightly to meet Emily's eye level. "Hi, Emily," she said. "Do you see someone here you know?" Emily glanced toward Rex again. The dog didn't move, didn't blink, but his eyes locked on hers like there was no one else in the room. Emily gave a small nod, her voice too quiet for the microphones. Claire looked at the judge. "Permission to approach the witness, Your Honor." The judge nodded, and Claire leaned in just enough to be heard. "Who is he, Emily?" Emily hesitated. Her lips moved as if she were about to speak, then stopped. The courtroom was silent, so silent that the faint hum of the ceiling fans sounded like a roar. Somewhere in the front row, a woman's bracelet clinked softly against the bench as she shifted. Emily looked at Rex again. And Rex, as if sensing the importance of the moment, slowly lowered his head in a subtle, almost respectful bow. It was an unusual scene, and everyone felt it. Something about the way they looked at each other was different. Not the connection of a dog recognizing his handler, but something deeper, more personal. No one knew exactly what the little girl would say. The prosecution's attorney leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a skeptical smirk on his face. To him, a child this young couldn't possibly offer credible testimony. The jury, however, leaned forward, their faces a mix of curiosity and quiet anticipation. The judge adjusted his glasses, his gaze fixed on Emily. "Miss Carter, you don't have to be afraid," he said gently. "Just tell us what you remember." Emily's mother shifted in her seat at the side of the courtroom, ringing her. "Hands." Claire Benton took a step back, giving Emily space, but kept her eyes on her. The moment seemed to stretch on forever. And then Emily opened her mouth. Emily's lips trembled as if the words were caught somewhere between her heart and her mouth. She glanced at the judge, then the rows of people staring at her, and finally back at Rex. Her small hands clutched the stuffed bear tighter, pressing it against her chest like a shield. Claire Benton, the defense attorney, didn't push her. She had been warned not to rush this moment, not to crowd the fragile trust between witness and truth. She simply knelt down again, her voice low, gentle. "Do you remember the first time you saw Rex?" Claire asked. Emily's eyes lit up for a fraction of a second, the kind of flicker that told you there was a memory waiting to come out. She nodded slowly, almost shyly. The courtroom leaned forward as if one collective. "Badi, can you tell us about it?" Claire asked softly. Emily shifted on the booster seat, her shoes dangling above the floor. "It was loud," she whispered. "Loud?" Claire encouraged. Emily's gaze wandered, not to the lawyer, not to the judge, but far away, back to that day months ago, the day that had unknowingly tied her fate to Rex's. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, warm enough for children to play outside without jackets. Emily had been in her front yard with her sidewalk chalk, drawing pink and blue clouds on the concrete. Her mother had gone inside for just a moment to check the laundry. The street was quiet, except for the sound of distant construction and faji, the occasional car rolling by. Then came the shouting. It wasn't friendly shouting, like neighbors calling across yards. It was sharp, urgent. Emily had looked up from her chalk and seen two men in the middle of the street. One of them was wearing a police uniform, the other looked sweaty, his shirt torn. They were arguing, or maybe it was more than arguing, because suddenly the man in the torn shirt ran. The next thing Emily remembered was a car door slamming, tires screeching, and then the dog, Rex, He was bigger than any dog she'd seen up close. His fur glinted in the sunlight, and his eyes locked on the man running down the street. Emily didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel something shift in the air. It was the kind of feeling even a child knew meant danger. Then, out of nowhere, the man turned and saw her. Emily had been standing at the edge of her driveway, chalk still in her hand, with his eyes fixed on her. She didn't know why he looked so strange, like he was making a decision. But she saw his hand go into his pocket, and she saw him start moving toward her. Before she could even think to step back, Rex was there. It happened so fast, she couldn't remember all of it. Just the sound of paws hitting pavement, the deep bark, the blur of fur between her and the man. She heard shouting, the man screaming, more barking. And then there were hands pulling her backward, someone yelling, "Get her inside." But what stayed with her the most wasn't the noise or the chaos. It was the way Rex had stood in front of her, his body angled toward the man, his teeth bared not in mindless rage, but in a kind of fierce promise, the promise that nothing would touch her. Back in the courtroom, Emily's small voice broke the silence. "He was there," she said, her eyes still on Rex, "when the bad man came." The words were so matter-of-fact, so simple, that it took a few seconds for their weight to land. But when it did, there was a faint ripple of murmurs through the crowd. The judge raised a hand for quiet, his expression unreadable. Claire didn't move, didn't push. She knew better than to load the moment with legal jargon or complicated questions. Instead, she let Emily's truth take its own path. "Did Rex hurt you that day?" Claire asked. Emily shook her head quickly. "No, he helped." "And how did he help you?" Emily's gaze shifted to the stuffed bear in her lap. She fiddled with its torn ear, her voice even softer now. "He stood there, between me and the man. He didn't let him come close." Claire nodded, glancing briefly at the jury before looking back at Emily. "Did anyone tell Rex to do that?" Emily frowned, as if the question confused her. "No, he just knew." That last word hung in the air. Knew. And it was the kind of word that told a deeper story without explaining it. It suggested instinct, connection, something beyond commands and training manuals. The prosecution attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, scribbling something on a legal pad. He was a sharp man with a reputation for dismantling weak witnesses, but he couldn't exactly badger a 3-year-old without looking like a villain. Still, his mind was already working on ways to frame her testimony as unreliable, the innocent ramblings of a child. But the jury wasn't seeing a confused toddler. They were seeing something else entirely, the quiet certainty in Emily's voice, the way Rex sat calmly as she spoke, like he knew every word she was saying. Claire decided to anchor the moment before it could drift. "Emily," she said gently, "do you think Rex is a bad dog?" Emily's eyes widened at the question. "No, he's a good dog. He saved me." Those last 3 words, "he saved me," made something shift in the room. Officer Hensley's jaw tightened, his hand unconsciously resting on Rex's shoulder. A woman in the gallery reached for a tissue. Even the judge paused, as though weighing whether this small voice had just altered the course of the trial. Claire gave Emily a warm smile. "Thank you, Emily. That's all I have." She stepped back toward the defense table, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The prosecutor didn't rise right away. Instead, he flipped a few pages in his notes, clearly debating whether to cross-examine. After a moment, he stood. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle, "when you say bad man, do you mean the person Rex bit?" Emily nodded. "And how do you know he was bad?" His voice had the careful cadence of someone trying to lead without seeming to. Emily thought for a moment. "Because he scared me." The prosecutor tilted his head slightly. Is it possible you were just scared because it was loud? Because people were shouting? Emily shook her head. No, he looked at me, like he was going to take me. The room went still again. It wasn't the sort of statement you could dismiss as childish confusion, not when it came with that kind of clarity. The prosecutor cleared his throat, realizing he'd pushed too far. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge nodded and looked toward the bailiff. You may step down, Emily. Emily slid off the booster seat, her small feet landing softly on the floor. She turned toward Rex, and for just a moment, the entire trial faded into the background. The little girl smiled, a small, genuine smile, and Rex's tail gave one slow, deliberate wag. It was a tiny exchange, but in the minds of everyone watching, it said more than any legal argument could. As Emily left the courtroom with her mother, the murmurs started again, low and cautious. They weren't about whether Rex had attacked without cause anymore. They were about whether this trial had just taken a turn no one could have predicted. For the first time since the proceedings began, Officer Hensley let himself hope. By the time Rex's trial began, the case had already become one of the most polarizing stories in the state. It wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about the entire canine program, police accountability, and whether instinct could be trusted. In law enforcement, the incident itself had taken place 3 months earlier in a quiet residential neighborhood that rarely saw police tape. That day, however, the street had been transformed into a war zone. Squad cars blocking intersections, yellow tape stretched across driveways, uniformed officers posted like statues, while onlookers whispered and pointed. The suspect at the center of it all was a man named Travis Doyle, a 34-year-old with a long list of prior arrests. He wasn't just known for petty crimes. His record included multiple counts of assault, resisting arrest, and carrying concealed weapons. Most residents didn't know all the details. They just knew his name carried weight in police briefings. On the day of the incident, officers had been dispatched to arrest Doyle after a tip that he was hiding in a relative's garage. What happened next would ignite months of debate. According to police reports, Doyle bolted when officers approached, tearing through a side yard and out into the street. Officer Mark Hensley, who had been on patrol nearby with Rex, received the call and arrived within minutes. Witnesses described seeing Rex leap from the patrol SUV, his paws hitting the ground with purpose. Moments later, the dog intercepted Doyle in the middle of the road. The official body cam footage, later played on news stations, showed Rex closing the distance and latching onto Doyle's arm. The man screamed, flailing wildly, before officers swarmed in to pull him down. Doyle's injuries were serious enough to require surgery, and his attorney immediately claimed that Rex had attacked without provocation. The police department initially defended Rex's actions, citing the canine's training and the danger Doyle posed. But the narrative began to shift after a local news outlet aired an edited version of the footage, one that started just seconds before Rex lunged. Without context, it looked like the suspect had simply been running, not threatening anyone. Public opinion began to fracture. Some saw Rex as a dangerous liability, an unpredictable animal who had no place in modern policing. Others saw him as a hero who had done exactly what he was trained to do. In coffee shops, church gatherings, and online forums, the debate was everywhere, and the divide was fierce. For the prosecution, the argument was simple. Doyle had been unarmed at the time of the takedown, and Rex's attack was excessive. They claimed that canine units, no matter how well trained, could make mistakes, and that those mistakes had deadly consequences. Their push wasn't just for Rex's removal from the force, but for his euthanasia, citing the public safety risk he posed. For the defense, the stakes were deeply personal. Rex wasn't just another canine. He was one of the most decorated in the department, credited with over a dozen successful apprehensions, multiple drug busts, and even locating a missing child. During a snowstorm, Officer Hensley had trained with him for years, forging a bond that was as much about trust as it was about skill. To the defense, taking Rex's life over this incident was not only unjust, it was unthinkable. The courtroom reflected the community's split. On the left side of the gallery sat animal rights advocates and citizens who believed in Rex's innocence. Many wore pins with his face on them, tiny circles of loyalty fastened to jackets and blouses. On the right side sat those who supported the prosecution, victims of past canine bites, family members of people injured during police operations, and activists who argued for reforming or abolishing canine programs entirely. Reporters described it as a trial within a trial. While the official case was state versus Rex, the undercurrent was far broader. A public referendum on whether animals could be entrusted with the power to use force in human affairs. The turning point in public attention came when whispers about the girl began circulating. Early in the investigation, Officer Hensley had told his attorney about Emily Carter, a child who had been on the scene during the incident. According to Hensley, Rex's actions made perfect sense if you knew she had been there. But until the defense located Emily and her mother, it was just a theory. When they did, the pieces began to shift. It turned out that Emily lived just 2 houses down from where Doyle had been hiding. She had been playing outside when the suspect fled into the street. Though the initial police report mentioned a bystander, it didn't identify her as a child. Hensley insisted that Rex had recognized the danger and positioned himself between Emily and Doyle, a claim that, if proven, would fundamentally alter the perception of what had happened. Still, proving it wouldn't be easy. The body cam footage that could confirm Emily's presence had been cut from the publicly released version, supposedly due to privacy concerns. The unedited footage remained in evidence, but hadn't yet been shown in court. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the case had taken on a life of its own. Television crews camped on the lawn, capturing soundbites from protesters. Morning shows debated whether K-9 South should be considered officers under the law or treated as police equipment. Social media hashtags like hashtag Justice for Rex and hashtag Ban K9S trended side by side, each with its own army of supporters. Businesses in town even took sides. A local diner offered a Rex special breakfast plate, with proceeds going toward the dog's legal defense fund. Across the street, a coffee shop displayed a sign reading, "Support the victims and canine attacks." The mayor, caught in the middle, issued a cautious statement urging respect for the legal process. But everyone knew the case had already become a political lightning rod. Inside the police department, morale was strained. Officers who had worked with Rex defended him fiercely, but there were whispers in the halls that the department might quietly want the trial over, whatever the outcome. The longer it dragged on, the more it pulled resources and attention from other cases. For Officer Hensley, though, there was no question. This was a fight he would see through to the end. Rex wasn't just his partner. He was family. Hensley knew that if Rex was found guilty, it wouldn't be a transfer or retirement. It would be a lethal injection. And Hensley couldn't stomach the thought of the dog who had saved lives, including Emily's, being destroyed over a misunderstanding. By the time Emily took the stand in Part 2, the trial had already stretched into its second week. The tension in the courtroom was like a live wire. Any unexpected statement, any new piece of evidence could change everything. When Emily's soft voice described the bad man and how Rex had stood between them, it sent ripples through both the prosecution and defense tables. To the defense, it was validation of what they'd been saying from the start. To the prosecution, it was a complication they hadn't fully prepared for, one that threatened to unravel their narrative. But in legal battles, emotion isn't enough. The next phase of the trial would hinge on hard evidence, and whether the judge would allow the unreleased body cam footage to be played in court. If the footage showed what Emily claimed, the defense would have their smoking gun. If it didn't, well, the consequences for Rex would be grim. As the court recessed for the day, the gallery erupted into chatter. Outside, the crowd pressed against the courthouse steps, hungry for updates. Camera flashes lit the air like lightning as reporters shouted questions to both attorneys. Claire Benton, holding her briefcase close, gave only one answer before ducking into her car. "We believe the truth is about to come out." Officer Hensley, walking Rex past the crowd, didn't stop to speak. But anyone who looked closely could see it. The way Rex's leash hung loose, the way Hensley's hand rested protectively on his partner's back. They were a team, and they were running out of time. The courthouse felt heavier that morning, a quiet pressure pressing on every person inside. Reporters whispered into microphones, their cameras trained on the front row where Emily and her mother waited. Claire Benton, the defense attorney, stood near the front, reviewing her notes, but keeping one eye on the child. Emily was fidgeting with the strap of her tiny backpack, the stuffed bear clutched to her chest. She was quiet, almost invisible in the chaotic atmosphere, yet everyone sensed the significance of her presence. It had been weeks since Emily was identified as a potential witness. Claire remembered the call from Officer Hensley vividly. "Emily was there," he said, his voice low with urgency. "She saw the whole thing. She knows why Rex acted. You need her in court." Claire hesitated. A 3-year-old on the witness stand was virtually unheard of. Could a child that young comprehend the events or relay them coherently? The legal risks were obvious. Any misstep could discredit not only the child's testimony, but the entire defense. Yet, as she reviewed her notes and the statements Hensley had provided, she knew they had no other choice. Emily might be the key to saving Rex. Her mother, Mrs. Carter, had been hesitant at first. She loved her daughter fiercely and feared the courtroom's intimidating environment. "She's just a child," she had said. "What if she gets scared? What if she says the wrong thing?" Claire had assured her that Emily would never be forced. "We won't pressure her," she promised. "We just want her to tell the truth, that's all." And Emily had agreed, in her own quiet way, though no one could be sure she fully understood the stakes. All she knew was that Rex had been her friend, the dog who had stood between her and something frightening. That bond was simple in her mind, yet powerful beyond measure. The courtroom itself seemed to hold its breath. The judge, a man who had presided over hundreds of cases, watched as Emily approached the witness stand. Even he seemed aware that this wasn't ordinary testimony. Emily's small frame barely reached the top of the chair, and a booster seat had been set up for her. Claire had taken the precaution of preparing a small microphone close enough to capture her voice without intimidating her. Emily climbed up, and the stuffed bear went with her. She held it like a shield, leaning against it for comfort. Her tiny feet dangled above the floor, and her eyes, wide and innocent, scanned the courtroom. The murmurs of the audience faded into silence as the judge gestured for her to begin. The prosecution lawyer, David Reynolds, a sharp man with decades of experience, raised an eyebrow. He wasn't used to facing witnesses this young. He adjusted his notes, rehearsing questions in his mind that could cast doubt on the child's memory. But even he hesitated. There was something about Emily's presence that was undeniably compelling. Claire knelt slightly in front of Emily, keeping her tone calm and gentle. "Hi, Emily," she said. "Do you know this dog here?" Emily's eyes met Rex's immediately. The dog's ears twitched, and he gave a small, steady gaze that seemed almost protective. Emily nodded, barely audible at first, and then whispered, "Yes, The courtroom leaned in. Even the judge paused. In that moment, Emily's testimony wasn't just a child speaking. It was the voice of innocence confronting the chaos of the legal system. The defense had rehearsed extensively for this moment, though they hadn't tried to coach Emily. The strategy was simple. Let the child speak freely, gently guide her if needed, and avoid leading questions. Any hint of manipulation could be disastrous. "Can you tell us what happened that day?" Claire asked softly. Emily fiddled with her bear. Her lips moved, forming the words slowly. It was loud, people shouting. Her small voice trembled. Slightly, but carried through the microphone. He came toward me." "Who came toward you?" Claire encouraged. "The man," Emily said. "The bad man." Gasps rippled quietly through the audience. The jury leaned forward. The prosecution attorney scribbled notes furiously. Even the judge tilted his head, his expression unreadable, though his eyes betrayed curiosity. Emily's words, simple as they were, began to shift the narrative. This was no longer just about a bite or a misunderstanding. Her testimony introduced context: a child in danger, a dog responding to a threat. Officer Hensley watched quietly from the side. Rex sat obediently, his tail barely moving. Even he seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. He had been trained for obedience, protection, and restraint, but this was different. This wasn't about commands. This was about a bond that had been forged in a moment of real danger, one Emily was finally articulating. The defense attorney let the silence settle after Emily spoke, giving the jury a chance to absorb the words. Then she asked gently, "Did Rex hurt you that day?" Emily shook her head, her small fingers clutching the bear even tighter. "No, he helped me." The courtroom was still. Even the smallest cough or shuffling of feet seemed amplified. In the quiet, for a moment, it felt as though the world had contracted to the space between Emily and Rex. Two figures bound together by a moment none of the adults could fully grasp. The prosecution, realizing that he had little room to intimidate the child, decided to try a different tactic. "Emily," he said carefully, "how do you know the man was bad?" Emily looked confused for a moment. Then her small voice came clearly. "He looked at me. Like he wanted to take me." The courtroom reacted instantly. A juror shifted in their seat. A reporter's pen paused mid-sentence. The weight of the child's simple observation hit harder than any legal argument. David Reynolds tried to maintain composure. "Could it be," he asked, "that you were just scared because people were shouting?" Emily shook her head firmly. "No, he wanted me." The words hung in the air, undeniable in their clarity. The adult logic of cross-examination could not diminish the authenticity of a child's fear. Coupled with a recollection of Rex's protective action, Claire Benton nodded encouragingly. "That's all we needed to hear," she said softly. "Thank you, Emily." Emily's small feet swung above the floor as she slid off the chair. She went to her mother, but before leaving the stand, she looked back at Rex. The dog's eyes met hers, steady and calm, acknowledging the understanding between them. In that silent moment, it was clear. The child and the dog shared a truth that transcended courtroom procedure, testimony, and argument. Outside the witness stand, the courtroom buzzed softly. Reporters whispered to each other. Jurors exchanged glances, and even the judge leaned back slightly, as if letting the gravity of what had just occurred sink in. This was not an ordinary case. This was something rare, a child's truth aligning perfectly with instinct and evidence, and challenging the assumptions of every adult in the room. Back at the defense table, Claire bent over the notes one last time, making mental adjustments for the next stage of the trial. The body cam footage, which had yet to be revealed in court, would be crucial. Emily's testimony had set the stage perfectly, but it wasn't enough on its own. The visual evidence would need to confirm what she had already said. Rex had acted to protect, not attack. Officer Hensley crouched near Rex, stroking his head gently. "You did good, buddy," he whispered, though no one else could hear. Rex leaned into the touch, calm and composed, his gaze unwavering. He had done his job, as he always did, and now a small voice had articulated the truth that would have otherwise been overlooked. Outside the courtroom, news crews captured every reaction. Interviews were being scheduled on the spot. "A toddler witness," one reporter said to the camera, "may have just saved the life of a police dog accused of excessive force." This story is unlike anything we've ever covered. Social media lit up with speculation, debates, and praise for the unlikely hero, the 3-year-old girl who had changed the course of the trial with her simple, honest words. The tension, however, was far from over. The prosecution still had the opportunity to counter with evidence, experts, and arguments intended to cast doubt on the child's observations. But for the first time since the trial began, the defense had momentum. The narrative of Rex as a protector, not a threat, had taken root in the courtroom, and Emily's role as the child, who had witnessed the truth, had given it credibility no one could ignore. By the end of that day, the courtroom had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. People weren't just seeing a case about a dog. They were witnessing a story about instinct, courage, and the unique bond between a child and an animal. The public, both inside and outside the courthouse, began to perceive Rex in a new light, not as a dangerous canine, but as a guardian. As Emily left the courtroom with her mother, she clutched her bear, unaware of the attention she had drawn. Rex walked beside Hensley, steady and composed, sensing the tension had eased, if only slightly. The trial would continue, with body cam footage and expert testimony still to be revealed, but the first battle had been won. The quiet bond between Emily and Rex had been laid bare, and in a courtroom accustomed to procedure and rules, something intangible but powerful had entered. Truth, simple, unadulterated truth, spoken by the tiniest witness in the room. The morning sun slanted through the tall arched windows of the courthouse, casting elongated patterns across the polished wooden floors. Inside, the air felt unusually heavy, thick with anticipation. The courtroom had been cleared of idle chatter, and everyone, jurors, reporters, officers, and the audience, waited with bated breath. Today, Emily would face Rex again, not merely as a witness, but as the connection between the events of that day and the truth that could determine the dog's fate. Emily sat quietly on the booster seat, her small hands clutching the worn stuffed bear like a shield. Her mother sat close, offering gentle reassurance, while Claire Benton knelt a few feet away, ready to guide her without leading. The judges' eyes were sharp but patient, a silent reminder that the courtroom expected decorum. Yet the gravity of the situation made even him pause. Rex sat in his familiar position near Officer Hensley, his body poised yet relaxed. His tail was still, his eyes fixed intently on Emily. It wasn't merely recognition in those deep brown eyes. It was focus, as if he too understood the weight of the moment. This wasn't training. This wasn't routine. This was truth, raw and immediate. Claire took a deep breath and crouched to Emily's level. "Hi, Emily," she said gently. "Do you see someone you know here today?" Emily's gaze flickered to Rex. Her lips parted, but no words emerged at first. She was studying him, as if measuring every detail, the fur, the ears, the gaze. Rex responded subtly, ears pricked, head slightly tilted. The courtroom felt every second stretch, suspended in a kind of expectant silence. Finally, Emily whispered, almost imperceptibly, "Yes." The courtroom leaned forward instinctively. Every head seemed to tilt, every eye trained on the tiny girl and the enormous dog. Even the judge's eyebrows rose in recognition of the moment's significance. This wasn't ordinary testimony. It wasn't just a recollection of events. It was a connection made visible. "Who is he?" Claire asked softly, careful not to push. Emily's small voice trembled, barely audible. "My friend." A murmur swept through the audience, quickly hushed by the judge's authoritative nod. Claire smiled, letting Emily feel confident and unpressured. There was no need to hurry. This moment required patience. Every second Emily spent focusing on Rex was a second the truth crystallized. The prosecutor, David Reynolds, adjusted his notes nervously. A 3-year-old could not be discredited in the conventional sense, yet he searched desperately for any angle. Perhaps she couldn't recall dates or times or specifics. Perhaps she could be framed as confused. But right now, all he could do was watch, just like everyone else. Emily shifted on the seat, hugging her bear a little tighter. She started, then paused. The courtroom held its breath. Even Rex seemed to recognize the hesitation. His eyes never left hers, unwavering, patient. The tension was palpable, thick enough to touch. Claire bent closer, voice warm and gentle. "Can you tell us what he did for you?" Emily's small hands shook slightly. "He kept me safe," she whispered. The words were faint but clear. Every ear in the room caught them. The prosecutor's pen froze mid-note. The jury exchanged glances. This testimony, simple and unadorned, carried a weight no legal argument could replicate. In that moment, Emily's truth became undeniable. Emily paused again, breathing through her small nose. Her eyes flicked to Rex. He stood in front. The bad man, the audience collectively inhaled. Here, in one small statement, lay the entire context of what had been misunderstood. Rex had not attacked recklessly. He had acted instinctively, protectively, guided by loyalty and awareness. Officer Hensley exhaled slowly, his hand brushing against Rex's neck in quiet reassurance. The dog remained calm, ears forward, as if understanding every syllable Emily spoke. The defense attorney allowed a brief pause, letting the weight of Emily's words settle. She knew this pause would let the jury absorb the implications before the prosecution could attempt their line of questioning. "Did Rex hurt you?" Claire asked softly. Emily shook her head quickly. "No, he helped me." The simplicity of the statement struck harder than any detailed argument could. Here was a child, 3 years old, describing the instinctive actions of a police dog in terms only a child could: protection, safety, trust. The courtroom felt charged, the tension almost tangible. David Reynolds cleared his throat and tried to regain control. "Emily," he said carefully, "could it be that you were just scared because people were shouting? Or that you misunderstood what Rex did?" Emily looked directly at him. Her gaze, clear and unwavering, met his then. Returned to Rex. No, he knew. He knew I was in danger. Even the judge shifted in his seat. This was no longer conjecture. Emily's recollection provided clarity that official reports and edited videos had obscured. Her small voice had become a bridge between raw instinct and documented evidence. The jury's scribbles slowed. Every word mattered. This tiny girl had just reframed the entire narrative. Claire Benton let Emily's words linger in the silence and asked one final pivotal question. "Emily, can you tell us what happened next?" Emily's gaze remained locked on Rex. Her lips moved slowly, as if finding the words carefully. He jumped. He stopped him. The courtroom exhaled as if the tension had been building. For years, for a moment, no one dared speak. Even the stenographer's fingers paused. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the instant when child, dog, and truth intersected. Rex sat perfectly still, acknowledging Emily's words without motion, as if the two shared a silent understanding. It was a rare, almost spiritual connection, one that transcended legal arguments, public opinion, and fear. Emily's mother let out a quiet, almost inaudible sigh of relief. She had been nervous all morning, fearing the courtroom's pressure might overwhelm her daughter. But Emily had delivered something far more potent than any adult could fabricate: clarity. The gallery shifted, some smiling faintly, some wiping tears. A few of the reporters quickly adjusted their cameras to capture the subtle expressions between child and dog. Social media would soon be flooded with images of this moment, not staged, not sensationalized, but real, human, and deeply emotional. After a moment, Claire gently nodded. "That's all, Emily. Thank you." Emily slid off the seat, tiny feet touching the floor, and moved toward her mother. But before leaving the stand entirely, she turned back toward Rex, the dog's eyes locked on hers, calm and steady. It was the kind of look that spoke volumes, far beyond the reach of words. In that pause, the courtroom seemed suspended. Every person present sensed it. The truth of the event had been articulated, not through expert testimony or forensic analysis, but through the innocent voice of a child who had lived it. Even David Reynolds, the seasoned prosecutor, could not mask the impression left by those moments. He scribbled notes furiously, likely to reconstruct some counter-argument, but even he must have known that the audience had just witnessed something rare: an incontrovertible bond between a human and an animal, tested under pressure, proven in instinct, and finally articulated in simple truth. As Emily and her mother walked back to the gallery, murmurs broke out. The weight of her testimony hung in the air, unshakable. For the first time in the trial, it was clear that Rex's actions were being seen in context, as protection, not aggression. Outside the courtroom, news crews captured every reaction, their microphones capturing the soft exclamations of jurors, reporters whispering about the bravery and clarity of the child. "It's incredible," one cameraman muttered. "A 3-year-old changed the entire perspective of this case." And for those in the courtroom who understood, the moment held deeper resonance. It was more than a legal strategy. It was a reminder that truth often comes from the most unexpected sources: the smallest voices, the purest hearts, and the instincts that can't be measured by law alone. As the courtroom recessed briefly, the tension did not lift entirely. The trial was far from over, but a turning point had been reached. Emily had spoken, and the seed of doubt about the prosecution's claims had been planted. Officer Hensley walked Rex out for a brief break, the dog's leash hanging loose in his hand. The bond between them, forged over years of training and now validated by a child's words, seemed unbreakable. The world outside the courtroom could debate, but here, in this moment, instinct and truth had won their first victory. And, in the quiet aftermath, everyone realized the moment of silence had spoken louder than any argument, any evidence, or any legal brief ever could. The courtroom was electric with tension as proceedings resumed after a short recess. Reporters and spectators whispered quietly. Cameras focused on the small figure of Emily Carter seated beside her mother. Every eye was on the child, though no one dared interrupt the heavy silence. Even the judge seemed to hold his breath, fully aware that what was about to unfold could redefine the entire case. Emily sat quietly, gripping her stuffed bear tightly. Her small fingers kneaded the fabric, twisting it back and forth as she prepared herself for the moment she had both feared and anticipated. Today, she wasn't just a witness recounting events. She was the bridge between Rex's instinct and the courtroom's understanding of truth. Every step, every glance, every gesture mattered. Officer Hensley, standing with Rex beside the defense table, watched the girl with guarded hope. Rex's Ears twitched slightly, as if he too sensed the intensity of the moment. He remained perfectly calm, though the subtle tension in his body mirrored the charged atmosphere of the room. This was the culmination of months of anticipation, training, fear, and hope. Claire Benton approached Emily quietly, bending down to meet her gaze. "Emily," she said softly, "do you see Rex?" Emily's eyes met the dog's, wide and unwavering. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "Can you tell everyone what he did for you that day?" Claire asked gently. Emily's lips moved slowly, searching for words. "He," her voice trembled slightly, but determination shone in her wide eyes. She glanced at her mother, who offered a soft nod of encouragement. Then she returned her attention to Rex. He stopped. Emily paused, then took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling. And then, clearly, softly but decisively, she spoke the words that would reverberate through the courtroom. "My hero." The courtroom fell completely silent. It was not a silence of boredom or inattention, but a silence of shock, awe, and understanding. 3 simple words, spoken by a 3-year-old, carried weight far beyond their simplicity. In that instant, the narrative shifted entirely. Rex was no longer merely a police dog accused of aggression. He was recognized for what he had truly been: a protector, a guardian, a hero in the purest sense. Even the judge leaned back slightly, momentarily speechless. Officers in the gallery exchanged glances, some nodding subtly. Jurors looked at each other, realization dawning that the testimony they were hearing was both authentic and undeniable. The prosecution attorney, David Reynolds, sat frozen for a heartbeat, then scribbled notes furiously, desperately trying to frame the child's words in a legal context. Yet he knew, deep down, that no amount of legal maneuvering could diminish the clarity and honesty of those 2 words. Rex, sensing the significance, rose slightly on his paws, tail wagging gently but deliberately. His eyes locked with Emily's, in a silent acknowledgement of trust and understanding. There was no command, no cue, only instinct and the bond between them. Every person in the room felt it, though none could fully articulate what they were witnessing. The unspoken language of loyalty and protection, expressed not through words, but through presence. Claire Benton allowed the moment to settle. "Emily," she said softly, "can you tell the judge and everyone else why you called him that?" Emily's voice was soft but clear. "Because he saved me." Her words hung in the air like a bell tolling in stillness. A faint murmur of recognition passed through the courtroom. This wasn't legal jargon or persuasive argumentation. This was lived experience, stated plainly and poignantly by a child who had faced danger and survived because of Rex's protection. Officer Hensley exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. The years of training, the countless drills, and the bond he had cultivated with Rex had culminated in this singular moment. And now, Emily's declaration had elevated that bond to undeniable proof in front of everyone. The prosecution tried to regain control. "Emily," David Reynolds began carefully, "are you sure Rex didn't hurt anyone that day? Could it be that he acted too aggressively?" Emily shook her head firmly. "No, he only stopped the bad man. He kept me safe." The courtroom reacted subtly, but powerfully. Even seasoned reporters paused, recognizing that the words carried an authenticity no cross-examination could unravel. The jurors leaned in, absorbing the child's testimony, while the audience felt an emotional shift. The narrative of Rex as a threat had begun to crumble under the weight of genuine, lived truth. Claire Benton leaned closer to Emily, guiding her with calm reassurance. "Emily, can you show everyone how Rex kept you safe?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then extended her small arms slightly, as if indicating the space between her and the imaginary danger that had loomed that day. "He stood here," she whispered, pointing toward Rex, "and he didn't let him come closer." Even the judge's stoic expression softened. The visualization, combined with Emily's two-word declaration, created a powerful, undeniable image. A child protected by instinct, courage, and loyalty embodied in Rex. Rex remained perfectly still, allowing Emily to complete the demonstration without distraction. The dog's restraint mirrored the child's innocence, a perfect balance of trust and protection. For anyone in the courtroom, it was impossible not to see what had happened and why the dog had acted as he did. Outside the courtroom, news crews were already speculating about what was unfolding. The story of a 3-year-old declaring her protector a hero had captured public imagination. Social media posts surged, and hashtags like #MyHeroRex began trending almost instantly. Clips of the moment, though brief, circulated widely, and commentators struggled to put into words what they had just witnessed. A combination of bravery, instinct, and innocence that transcended the usual legal proceedings. Inside the courtroom, proceedings continued, but the momentum had shifted irrevocably. Witness after witness would provide context, evidence would be analyzed, and experts would offer opinions. Yet the emotional weight of Emily's testimony, and those 2 words, would linger throughout the trial. It had reframed the case from an abstract debate over aggression to a story of protection, courage, and the bond between child and dog. Officer Hensley and Claire exchanged a brief look, a silent understanding passing between them. They had won the first, most crucial battle, credibility. Emily had spoken, and the jury, the judge, and even the public could not ignore the truth. She articulated. Emily's mother quietly wiped a tear from her cheek, unsure if it was relief, pride, or simply awe at her daughter's bravery. She had feared the courtroom, the scrutiny, and the pressure that came with public attention. Yet here was her tiny child, commanding the attention of an entire room, speaking truth with clarity and courage beyond her years. The courtroom finally began to stir as the judge called for a brief recess. Reporters murmured, jurors whispered. Quietly, and spectators exchanged glances. Everyone recognized that the trial's trajectory had shifted. What had started as a potentially divisive case about a dog's actions had become a story of instinct, loyalty, and undeniable heroism. For Rex, the tension was almost tangible. He wagged his tail slightly, sensing approval from Officer Hensley, and lay down calmly. The bond between him and Emily had just been witnessed by everyone present, cementing his role not as a threat, but as a guardian. Claire Benton allowed herself a brief smile. The next steps would involve presenting additional evidence, including the body cam footage and expert testimony, but the hardest part had been accomplished. Emily's 2 words had cut through doubt, hesitation, and legal maneuvering to reach the undeniable truth. As the courtroom emptied for the short recess, Emily and her mother walked back slowly, hand in hand. Emily clutched her bear, unaware of the profound effect her declaration had on the lives surrounding her. Rex followed closely, obedient and calm, the silent hero whose actions had been validated in the most extraordinary way. And somewhere in the quiet hum of anticipation, the courtroom, the city, the nation even, began to understand the weight of those simple, life-changing words. My hero. The courtroom remained charged with electricity, long after Emily uttered the words that would define the trial. My hero? The tension that had dominated every session now shifted into something heavier, a contemplative, almost reverential. Quiet. Reporters lowered their cameras. Jurors exchanged uneasy but thoughtful glances, and even the prosecution seemed momentarily disarmed. Officer Hensley knelt beside Rex, running a careful hand on the dog's back. The dog, steady and calm, seemed to understand that a barrier of doubt had just been shattered. All those months of waiting, of training, of facing scrutiny had led to this single, undeniable validation. The judge called the room to order, his gavel striking lightly against the polished wood. "We will resume proceedings in 5 minutes," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority, but betraying a hint of human awe. No one dared murmur. In that silence, the full impact of Emily's testimony hung like a tangible presence. Outside, the courthouse had become a frenzy. News crews rushed to their live feeds, trying to capture the aftermath of the courtroom revelation. Social media was ablaze, with hashtags like #MyHeroRex trending nationally. The story of a 3-year-old child declaring her protector a hero resonated far beyond the courtroom, sparking debates about instinct, loyalty, and the role of police dogs in modern law enforcement. Inside, the jurors returned from their brief recess, visibly shaken but attentive. Their previous deliberations, informed by reports, witness accounts, and edited footage, were now overshadowed by the undeniable authenticity of Emily's perspective. A child had given voice to the events in a way no adult could. Her innocence and clarity cut through legal jargon and strategy like a knife. Claire Benton, the defense attorney, remained calm, though inside she allowed herself a quiet moment of triumph. Emily had not only provided testimony, but had reframed the narrative entirely. The defense's strategy had relied on this moment, on the credibility of lived experience and instinct, and it had succeeded beyond expectations. The prosecution, David Reynolds, composed himself quickly, knowing that the case was far from over. He adjusted his notes and prepared for the next stage of questioning, determined to challenge the reliability of a 3-year-old's memory. Yet even he could not ignore the emotional weight of what had just occurred. Any attempt to dismiss Emily's testimony now would risk public outrage and could appear callous in the eyes of the jury. The next witnesses were experts in canine behavior, brought in by both sides to provide context. Dr. Lauren Mitchell, a canine behaviorist, explained the instincts that guide trained police dogs. A dog like Rex is trained to respond to threats in a controlled, precise manner, she testified. His actions are not random. They are responses to perceived danger, often to protect vulnerable individuals. When asked about Emily's account, Dr. Mitchell nodded. "It aligns perfectly with known canine protective behaviors," she said. "It is entirely plausible, and in fact likely, that Rex positioned himself between the child and the suspect to prevent harm." The prosecution countered with their own expert, a retired police trainer, who argued that canine actions could sometimes be excessive, especially under stress. "Dogs are not perfect," he warned. "Even trained canine South can misinterpret situations and act in ways that put the public at risk." But the courtroom felt the imbalance. Emily's testimony, simple and heartfelt, carried an authenticity no expert could fully contest, while the debate over procedure and behavior was nuanced. The child's lived experience was immediate and undeniable. Meanwhile, jurors began to whisper among themselves. The gallery could sense the shift. Emily's words had fundamentally reframed the trial. No longer was it a question of aggression or protocol. It was a matter of instinct, protection, and truth. The defense had achieved something remarkable. The audience, the jury, and even some members of the prosecution were now grappling with the undeniable reality of what had transpired. Officer Hensley felt a swell of pride as he glanced at Rex. The dog had been calm, obedient, and composed throughout the expert testimonies. Every observer could see the bond between them, a bond validated by Emily's words. The years of training, the countless drills, the quiet moments of connection had culminated in this undeniable proof of loyalty and courage. Claire Benton, aware of the shifting mood, prepared for the final segment of testimony, the unreleased body cam footage. This footage, uncut and unedited, would show the events exactly as they had unfolded on the day of the incident. Its release carried enormous risk. Any ambiguity could still sway the jury against Rex. But no. Reinforced by Emily's testimony, the defense was confident that the footage would confirm what had been described. When the footage finally played, the courtroom watched in stunned silence. The scene unfolded exactly as Emily had described: a suspect fleeing, a child present, and Rex positioning himself carefully between them. The dog did not bite indiscriminately or act recklessly. He acted decisively, guided by instinct and training. Every motion, every pause, every subtle gesture confirmed what the 3-year-old had articulated with such clarity. Rex had acted to protect, not attack. Gasps echoed through the room as the jury absorbed the footage. Even seasoned reporters leaned forward, captivated by the combination of instinct, courage, and human-animal bond on display. The prosecution attorney scribbled furiously, but even he had to acknowledge the alignment between Emily's account and the visual evidence. The room's atmosphere had shifted completely. What had once been a tense, divisive debate over Rex's actions now carried a sense of validation, recognition, and most importantly, justice. After the footage, the defense called Officer Hensley back to the stand. "Can you explain Rex's actions?" Claire asked. Hensley's voice was steady. "Rex is trained to protect, not to harm." That day, he positioned himself between Emily and the suspect. He did exactly what any trained canine would do. He acted to prevent harm to a vulnerable individual. Emily's presence in the courtroom, combined with the body cam footage and Hensley's explanation, created a narrative that was both powerful and undeniable. The prosecution's attempts to frame Rex as a threat seemed increasingly tenuous. The emotional truth, coupled with the objective evidence, made the dog's actions impossible to misrepresent. As closing arguments approached, the courtroom was tense but resolute. Claire Benton spoke first, addressing the jury with measured passion. "You have seen the evidence. You have heard from a child who lived through the events. You have watched the footage. Rex acted not out of aggression, but out of protection. He is not a liability. He is a hero." David Reynolds countered, emphasizing the need for caution and accountability. Even trained canine South can misinterpret situations. He argued, "We must consider the safety of the public." But the courtroom had already been swayed. A combination of Emily's testimony, the body cam footage, and the defense's compelling narrative had shifted perception. Rex's role as protector was clear, and the doubt cast by the prosecution had diminished significantly. Finally, the judge addressed the courtroom. "This case has revealed more than legal arguments and testimony. It has revealed the bond between human and animal, the instinct that guides trained protectors, and the courage of a child who witnessed the truth." The jurors filed out to deliberate. Outside the courtroom, reporters scrambled for statements, and social media buzzed with anticipation. The city, the state, and even national audiences waited, captivated by a story that transcended ordinary legal drama. Inside, the courtroom was silent once more. Officer Hensley stood quietly beside Rex, who remained calm, sensing the magnitude of the moment. Emily held her mother's hand, her small fingers intertwined with a sense of pride and accomplishment. She couldn't fully understand. The trial had reached its climactic stage. The child's 2 words had reframed the entire narrative. The body cam footage had confirmed her story. The emotional and factual weight now rested entirely on the jury's shoulders. A verdict, when delivered, would determine not only Rex's fate, but also how the world would perceive the extraordinary bond between child and dog, instinct and courage. And as the courtroom waited, every person present understood that this was more than a legal case. It was a story of heroism, innocence, and the undeniable truth that sometimes, even in a world dominated by rules and procedure, the simplest words, spoken by the smallest voice, can change everything. The courtroom was quiet, but the tension had never felt so heavy. Every person inside seemed aware that the final moments of this trial would define the fate of Rex, the police dog whose actions had been scrutinized, debated, and questioned for weeks. Jurors filed back into the room, their expressions solemn yet measured. The judge, aware of the gravity, leaned forward slightly, gavel in hand, ready to deliver instructions. Emily sat beside her mother, clutching her stuffed bear. Her small frame exuded an unexpected calm, as if she understood, in her own way, that something monumental was about to happen. Officer Hensley stood near Rex, who was perfectly poised and attentive, ears pricked forward as if sensing the culmination of events. The bond between child and dog had been witnessed, validated, and now awaited the final confirmation. The judge addressed the jury first. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have seen the evidence, heard the testimony, and observed the events as they unfolded. It is now your duty to deliberate and render a verdict based on the facts, the law, and the truth you have discerned." The jurors nodded, each carrying the weight of responsibility. They had witnessed Emily's testimony firsthand, her clarity, innocence, and courage, as well as the body cam footage, expert analyses, and Officer Hensley's account. The child's simple words, "my hero," echoed silently in the minds of everyone present. Outside, news crews and social media feeds buzzed incessantly, reporting on the anticipated verdict. The story of a 3-year-old who had spoken truth in a courtroom dominated headlines nationwide. The narrative had shifted dramatically. Rex was no longer just a subject of controversy, but a symbol of protection, courage, and instinctive heroism. Back inside the courtroom, the jury began its deliberation. The process was thorough, deliberate, and intense. Each juror weighed the facts, the expert opinions, and the emotional resonance of Emily's testimony. They debated the significance of Rex's training, the threat posed by the suspect, and the undeniable bond between the child and the dog. Time seemed to stretch as the deliberation continued. The public and press waited with bated breath outside, but within the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Emily fidgeted slightly, her small fingers playing with her bear, sensing the gravity of the moment, even without fully understanding the implications. After what felt like hours, but was, in reality, a little over 90 minutes, the jurors returned to the courtroom. The judge called the room to order. Every eye was on the jury foreperson, who rose to speak. The room fell into an expectant hush. "We, the jury," the foreperson began, voice steady yet filled with quiet intensity, "find that Rex acted in self-defense and in defense of the child, Emily Carter. His actions were justified, necessary, and in accordance with his training. We find no grounds for criminal liability." The courtroom erupted in subtle but meaningful reactions. Relief, joy, and awe spread among those present. Claire Benton allowed herself a small, controlled smile, satisfied that the months of preparation, strategy, and patient guidance of Emily had culminated in a just outcome. Emily's mother bent down to hug her daughter, tears welling in her eyes. "You were amazing," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Emily hugged her bear tightly, a faint smile spreading across her face. She didn't fully grasp the legal complexities, but she understood one thing clearly. Rex had been recognized as her hero. Officer Hensley patted Rex's side gently, whispering, "You did it, boy. They understand now." Rex remained calm, tail swishing slightly, aware that the recognition he had received went beyond commands or accolades. It was a human acknowledgement of loyalty and courage. The judge spoke once more, emphasizing the broader significance. This case demonstrates the importance of understanding actions in context, the value of instinct, and the courage required to witness and articulate truth. Let this serve as a reminder that sometimes the smallest voices can reveal the most profound truths. Reporters quickly filed statements, eager to capture the emotional depth and moral clarity of the trial. Interviews with Emily's mother and Officer Hensley highlighted the extraordinary nature of the events. The child's courage, the dog's restraint and protection, and the courtroom's response became a story told across the nation. A tale that transcended legal boundaries to touch hearts universally. The prosecution attorney, David Reynolds, maintained professional composure, but could not ignore the impact of the proceedings. While he had argued diligently, he recognized that Emily's presence and testimony had changed the narrative irreversibly. The truth had been articulated with such clarity that contesting it further would have been futile. Outside the courthouse, crowds had gathered, reporters broadcasting live. Social media erupted with praise and admiration. The hashtags #MyHeroRex and #ToddlerTestimony trended nationwide. Citizens celebrated the recognition of instinct, courage, and loyalty, marveling at how a child's simple words could reveal a profound truth about protection and heroism. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, Emily's impact continued to resonate. Jurors reflected on the innocence and courage of a 3-year-old who had faced a frightening situation and spoken truth with clarity. Every adult present seemed acutely aware that the events they had witnessed were extraordinary, a reminder of the purity of perception unclouded by bias, fear, or procedure. Officer Hensley finally allowed Rex to stand beside Emily. The dog's steady gaze met hers, and in that quiet, unspoken exchange, a bond reaffirmed itself. The dog had been recognized not just legally, but emotionally and morally. Emily's small words had granted validation that no amount of legal argumentation could replicate. Claire Benton approached Emily and her mother, kneeling to their level. "You were incredible," she said warmly. "You told the truth, and everyone could see it." Emily smiled faintly, her bear hugged tightly against her chest. She didn't fully understand the magnitude of her words, but she felt the warmth of recognition, pride, and love from the people around her. Her voice, small yet powerful, had created ripples far beyond the courtroom walls. The defense team quietly celebrated their victory. Months of preparation, strategic patience, and faith in Emily's honesty had paid off. The narrative had shifted completely. Rex was no longer viewed with suspicion, but as a true protector, his actions justified and his instinct affirmed. Even the judge seemed moved. In his closing remarks, he emphasized that the trial had revealed more than the behavior of a dog or the legality of actions. It had revealed the extraordinary impact of innocence, truth, and the courage to witness and speak that truth, no matter one's age. As the courtroom emptied, reporters swarmed for final interviews, capturing the story that would soon dominate headlines nationwide. Emily walked slowly with her mother, her small hand intertwined with Rex's leash, Officer Hensley guiding calmly. Spectators and jurors alike watched, visibly touched by the extraordinary bond displayed so naturally between child and dog. The story of the trial, the testimony, and Emily's pivotal 2 words, "my hero," would become a cultural touchstone, illustrating the power of truth, instinct, and the courage of the smallest voices. Across the city and beyond, people celebrated the story as more than legal resolution. It was a tale of heroism, loyalty, and the recognition of instinctive courage. Even days later, news coverage, social media discussions, and public conversations returned repeatedly to that moment when a child had faced the courtroom, and, with 3 simple words, reshaped understanding. For Emily, Rex, and everyone involved, the trial became a lasting testament to the power of truth, innocence, and heroism. In the quiet aftermath, Officer Hensley walked Rex through the empty courthouse corridors. The dog's posture was proud, yet calm. A bond between them, once tested by procedure, scrutiny, and fear, had been validated. Rex was not just a police dog. He was a guardian recognized as such by law, by witnesses, and most importantly, by the child whose safety he had instinctively ensured. Emily sat on a bench with her mother, her bear still in her lap, her eyes bright with pride. She may have been too young to understand the complexities of the legal system, but she had comprehended what truly mattered: loyalty, protection, courage, and recognition. She had spoken, and the world had listened. The courthouse doors opened to a bright, sunlit day. Crowds outside cheered quietly. Reporters rushed to document the unfolding story, and citizens marveled at the extraordinary events. Emily, her mother, and Rex stepped out together, a tiny child, her loyal dog, and the man who had guided them into a world forever changed by a story of courage, instinct, and the undeniable truth spoken by the smallest, bravest voice in the room. And so, the trial concluded, leaving behind not only a legal victory, but a story that would be told for years. The story of a 3-year-old who faced a courtroom, a police dog who acted with instinctive heroism, and the 2 words that changed everything: my hero.